So we're just about at the top of the hour, so I will go ahead and get started. So welcome everybody. So this is our fourth session for the RQAP credential, the GLP study group. So welcome to all. I'll try and actually remember to introduce myself. So I'm Sherry Lee Dawson. I'm the director for training and development at for QA at Charles River, and I am RQAP-GLP certified. Is that the right term? Certified.
Technically credentialed, I believe.
Credentialed, yeah. Kind of like GLPs in Canada. So I actually wrote the exam twice. So I wrote it for the first time in 2001 and I passed it. And then I rewrote it again in 2005. Because back then we didn't do a lot of training and we didn't realize in-house trainings could be used for renewal, which you can. Plus there's lots of fantastic webinars offered throughout the year through SQA. So there's lots of opportunities for you to get those units once you do pass to maintain your credential. On the call, we also have Brendan. So Brendan, I don't know if you want to unmute yourself and introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Brendan Highland. I'm also from Canada, and I have had my RQAP-GLP since I think 2011. Yeah, I'm an independent consultant. I've been working with GLP facilities for many years now. And I'm happy to be here.
Excellent. Happy to have you. All right. So we'll go ahead and get started. So today's session is on compliance assessment, auditing, and what to audit. First, we're going to cover some exam writing. So we're going to go over some logistics, good to know, helpful hints. If you've been on a session previously, this has all been covered. So I won't take too much time, but I will quickly go through the material just in case you are new. This is the first session you're attending. So just a reminder, the logistics, it's 165 multiple choice questions. 15 are not scored. So we don't know which 15. It's a random 15 of those 165 questions. And they're in there to basically test. So there are groups that periodically every few years, they get a group of folks that create questions for the quiz. And then they start like filtering out, I guess, older questions or questions that are not necessarily testing as well. And then to assess newer questions, they do test them out before they just dump them into the quiz. So that's what those 15 are. They're questions being tested or potentially reevaluating because perhaps they're not been scoring very well. You get 3.5 hours, which gives you approximately 1.25 minutes per question. For extra costs, there is a special testing for candidates whom English is not their first language. And if English isn't your first language, I do encourage you to take that option if that makes sense for you, simply because it's a very long quiz, a test. And if you're having to try and translate a lot of the content of the question, you're gonna very easily run out of time. So they do have allowances for people who English is not their first language. So if that's an option that I do encourage you to take if it applies for you. There is a practice exam, so you can go through the SQA website and you can try out the exam. Now, we've had a lot of feedback that the exam questions don't really reflect the exam. Well, they were prepared the same way as exam questions, but they are easier questions. They just happen to be easier questions. It's not that they specifically created easier questions for the quiz, but it's to give you a sense of like how long a wording is, the type of how a question is phrased, etc. So the exam covers the FDA GLPs, EPA GLPs, OECD principles of GLP, and 21 CFR Part 11. So we strongly recommend that you read through all the suggested material in the candidate handbook. Again, you can access the candidate handbook through the SQA website. You go to the SQA website to the RQAP section. There's there's information on the candidate handbook, all the required materials or the recommended materials to read, etc. Know your regulations. Preambles will help understand the expected interpretation of the applicable regulations, which is really the key factor. Answer the questions based on the most conservative approach to what the regulations indicate. This may differ from what you do at your company. Again, as for those of you who've been working in GLP, you know there's a lot of gray area. When you're taking the exam, think strictest sense of what those regulations say. That's your best trick to do well in this quiz, in the exam. There's lots of questions and not a lot of time. Read through the question carefully. If a question looks really long or complicated, or you start getting through it and see that you're taking too much time, skip it and come back to it. The online system does allow you to mark questions that either you're not sure of or the ones that you've skipped, and then you can come back to it. Watch your time. So after your first hour, you should be through between 50 to 55 questions. So make sure you're pacing yourself. And if you're unsure, guess. A wrong answer is worth the same as no answer. So if you get it wrong, it's the same as if you didn't get time to answer it. You're not penalized extra points if you get it wrong. Watch for keywords. These will help you assess what regulations you should be answering. For example, if it says protocol, you know you're talking from the FDA or EPA regulations versus study plan, which is OECD. Control article is FDA, reference article EPA, reference item OECD. Reference to pesticides is typically going to be EPA. Multi-site is going to usually be OECD, etc. And apply logic. Most questions have two answers that are clearly incorrect. The other two, that's where you're going to have to sort of weed through which is the most appropriate, and then look for those keywords and stuff. All right, so today's session is on compliance assessment, auditing, and what to audit. So by the way, in terms of, this is a study group, so this isn't a training. Like, I'm not here to train you on GLP information. So the more you put into this session, the more you get out of it. If you have any questions, put it in the chat or unmute yourself and ask your question. It's a study group, right? All right, so auditing, what to audit. So the topics that basically that section covers is basically it includes protocols, amendments, deviations, SOPs, training records, equipment records, validation records, computer system lifecycle. I'm not going to go through every single detail. These presentations are available in SQA through the website. In your learning materials, there is a group and you can see the slides and all that fun stuff will be available for you. Test material characterization, preparation and analysis, method validations, chain of custody, data including data traceability, final report, test material, accountability, test system, animal husbandry data, study data including calculations, statistics, archiving, study director records, and QA audits. So that's kind of what's encompassed, and this represents, I don't know if I wrote it down. Maybe I didn't write it down. It represents, I will open the document and tell you what it represents. All right, just give me a second.
While Sherry is looking at that. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Sherry.
No, go ahead. Actually, thanks. Sorry, I'm trying to open the candidate handbook for y'all.
No problem. I was just going to read out what was in the chat in case anyone is not joining with access to the chat. Someone asked the logistical question about when will they get approval of their applications, and I just wanted to say that that's a logistical question, so I'm happy to answer it. All candidates are guaranteed to hear back by mid-March. So if you have submitted an application for this year, for this upcoming cycle, and you haven't heard back, you should be hearing back by the end of this week or by early next week at the absolute latest.
Okay, so it is in compliance management. So compliance assessment, auditing, and what to audit would be section C, which is worth 21% of the exam questions. And this is the candidate handbook that I was referring to that is available from the SQA website that gives you all the logistic information and all that fun stuff. Okay, all right. All right, so as I said, this session is a training session. It isn't specifically here for me to tell you information. I'm not an expert in everything or anything. So what we're here for is to basically just, you know, interact with each other, offer our opinions. So I've prepared some questions, open-ended questions, so you all can read through it, put your answers in the chat, and then we'll discuss as to what's the best answer, what might we have forgotten that'll help you, you know, have the information to address those type of questions. Again, the exam itself is multiple choice. All right, so let's start with an easy one. So what acronym is used to ensure documentation standards, and what does it stand for? So you can put your answers in the chat. We're not going to do the polls. It took way too long, and then basically we have to wait until everyone's responded before we start looking at the responses. So it's just easier to do it in the chat. So yes, we have our first answer, Alcoa. So Alcoa, that's a great answer. Any other answers? Alcoa Plus. All right. Any other answers? Alcoa Plus Plus. All right, so we have an Alcoa Plus Plus. And what does all of those terms mean? So again, you can put it in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself and answer, by all means, go ahead and do that. I'll give you a minute or two, and then if not, I will. All right, so we've got A for accurate. That's great. We got attributable, legible, contemporary, original, accurate. Attributable, legible, contemporaneous, original, accurate. Attributable, legible, contemporaneous, original, accurate, complete. Attributable, legible, contemporaneous, original, accurate, traceable. All right, so we got a lot of that going. So the term typically is Alcoa Plus. It was recently, within the last year, upgraded to Alcoa Plus Plus. So and Alcoa in general is the right term for sure. And then there's plus or plus plus. We don't know what the content of the exam would be, so it's good to know all of them. So the Alcoa Plus is, so Alcoa first is attributable, legible, contemporaneous, original, and accurate. So that's your Alcoa. The first plus adds the addition of complete, consistent, enduring, and available. And the second plus now that's been recently added is for traceable. Traceable is kind of a component of the Alcoa Plus, but regulators felt that traceable was really important, so they wanted to emphasize. All right. Does anybody have any questions concerning what Alcoa stands for, or what specifically those terms actually mean? So we have attributable, legible, contemporaneous, original, accurate. I think those ones are fairly clear. What about the plus stuff for complete, consistent, enduring, and available? Does anybody have information like how would you describe complete? What does complete mean to you? The question, so recent is Alcoa Plus. Actually, Alcoa Plus has been around for a while. It sort of made its way in from industry. It's you know, I don't know if it's appeared first in GMPs or GCPs or ISO, but the first plus has been around for a while now. The second plus is the more recent one as of like last year. So complete, we have a no missing data. Yeah, complete, you want to make sure all of the information is there. And that includes any reevaluations or reassessments. So if you have a sample that you have to re-inject, those initial records shouldn't be tossed, right? Your records should be complete. What about consistent? Does anybody have an idea what consistent means? Conflicting information? Yeah, exactly. You don't want to have conflicting information. So the data should be consistent with what's in the report, what's in the tabulation. Yes, not self-contradictory. So you don't want to have, your raw data saying the result was 5, and then in your report, your tables you're reporting is 5.1, and then in your report you're discussing it as 5.3. It needs to be consistent, right? It's the same information throughout. Yeah, recorded the same way for all animals and samples. Coherent. Good job. All right, enduring. What does enduring mean? It's a good one. Will last, no fading ink or outdated computer systems. Excellent. Data is readable for time required by regulations. Absolutely. So it needs to be enduring. So we need to be able to access those records from, a day after the study finalizes up to 10, sometimes 15 years, whatever the duration is required based on regulations. So we have to make sure that the format is in human readable format. If you retire software, you have to make sure that you have either you can re-access it through a backup version, or if you're upgrading your system, you want to make sure that you're testing to ensure that it can read older versions of the data, etc. So you want to make sure that if those regulators come a knocking and want to see the data, it's there. And we don't tend to have it very often. But back in the day when I first started in QA eons ago, we used to have like printouts from different materials, different instruments and stuff like that. So after a while, it would start fading. So those things, thermal paper. Thank you. That was the term that I was looking. There was some data collected on thermal paper, and then after a while, it just started getting fainter and fainter and fainter, and then we realized, okay, we might have to start making a scan of it while it's still legible. And printed weights from scales, exactly. Yep. Excellent. All right. And what about available? What does available stand for? Accessible and readable. Absolutely. It can be accessed at any time. Yeah, for review and inspection. Exactly. So typically the available kind of warps us in with the archiving, right? We want to make sure that our data and all our records are archived in a manner so that when the agency shows up at our facility and wants to see stuff, we can take it out of archives and we know that everything's there, that it's available and readable. And traceable, who can explain what traceable is? Who did the work and when? Exactly. And how the data was generated. So was it handwritten records? Was it from a software? And if it's from software, do we have that information that links it to? Can we see the chain of custody of the documentation? All documentation available to understand the process. Exactly. We want to be able to trace how the data was generated and how it got to potentially to the archiving stage. We want to know what that flow is. All right, steps can be followed in the data. We can check changes to reconstruct the study. Perfect. Great job, everyone. All right, let's move on. Second question. So if a software vendor advertises that they have fully validated their software, what would you expect a test facility using that software to have done? So you're purchasing a software for whatever purposes, data collection, some sort of data collection. It is in the regulated space. So what would you want to see the vendor is saying that they've audited. What do you want to, what would you as a test facility expect to do? So we've got audit the vendor, yep, validate its use and control user access, qualification and risk assessment, a vendor assessment, qualify the vendor and the validation package for the system, yeah. All right, that's some great great input. Is it GLP software? Absolutely. So those are the type of questions you want to see. And I will say, I think going back to 2001, when I did my first one, that was actually a question in the exam. I highly doubt it's still there because software 2001, the software questions and CSV computer validation were a lot more simplistic. But that was definitely a question that it was similar to that concept. So what I have in my notes, validate the software for the facility's use, intended purpose as installed and configured. This can incorporate, you can incorporate the vendor's validation or qualification documents, possibly reducing complexity, but those vendor documents do not eliminate the facility's overall responsibility. So basically you can't just take what the software vendor did and say, okay, perfect, we're good to go, and let's start using it. You do have to do your own validation. You have to make sure it's going to meet your needs. It's going to do what you're actually requiring it to do for your use and purposes. So this includes the responsibility to establish procedures to ensure that computerized systems are suitable for their intended purpose and are operated and maintained in accordance with the principles of GLP. That comes from the OECD GLP's document 17, 1.3.123. For vendor supplier systems, it's likely that much of the documentation created during the development is retained at the vendor site. If documentation is retained at the vendor site, test facility management should ensure it's securely stored. This may require a formal contract between the vendor and the test facility. In this case, evidence of a formal assessment and/or vendor audits should be available at the test facility. Formal acceptance testing by the test facility of vendor supplied systems is required. And again, that's from the OECD GLP's document 17, 1.637. All right. Moving on to is there any questions on this? Again, at any point, if you have any questions or other topics to discuss, or a question that's kind of a spin-off from this, please feel free, unmute yourself, ask your question. Again, this is not here as a training session for me to provide my information to you. It's really serves as a discussion, so you guys can understand things better, get clarity in anything that you're not certain of, ask your questions, etc. All right, so this is a longer one. So you are performing an audit of the formulation preparation data and the dosing data. You know that the formulation, as per the protocol study plan, is a suspension. What would you expect to see in the preparation records? What type of samples should be taken for analysis of the formulation? What documentation should you expect to see in the animal room during dosing? I'll give you a few minutes to reread that, and you can answer each question or like just add information as you go. You don't have to answer all three in a big long paragraph. Feel free to just add your comments as you see. And again, if anybody wants to unmute themselves and verbalize their response or verbalize any questions, by all means. All right, so we do have an answer. We have uniformity. So it's a suspension. So you definitely want to see that there's uniformity. And how would you go about assessing uniformity? So we've got an approved protocol study plan. Absolutely, you want to see an approved protocol or study plan. Appropriate mixing to ensure suspension is homogeneous, mixed just prior to dosing. All right, homogenization, mixing. Should be stirred in the animal room. Absolutely. It should be some sort of mixing going on in the animal room if it's a suspension, right? You don't want to just leave it sitting in the jar because it might not be homogeneous as you're dosing. So approved procedures. Yes, you want to see approved procedures in terms of preparation. You want to see homogeneity year. I'm not sure what that means. Qualified equipment. Yes, absolutely. You want to see documentation of what equipment was used. Samples from top, middle, and bottom. All right, that's a great, yes. So typically that's how you're going to usually assess your suspension, by testing samples from your top and your middle and your bottom to make sure that you're getting the same concentration throughout. You want to test homogeneity, concentration, and stability. Absolutely. All right. So what would you expect to see in the preparation record? So you do want to see, obviously, you want to see documentation of the prep, right? You want to see the instructions, but you want to see positive documentation to show those steps were completed. So you're typically going to expect to see some sort of homogenization or stirring or something, right? So that should be in the instructions, and there should be documented evidence on that. Mix per ml, absolutely. What type of samples? So I think we covered that. So you definitely want homogeneity, which will also cover your concentration, and stability if it wasn't previously assessed. And you want, because it's a suspension, you want it top, middle, and bottom, just to prove that that preparation actually was homogeneous. And what you want to see in the animal room during dosing. So you want to see, obviously, documentation that the animals were dosed appropriately, but you'll want to see some sort of documentation to support formulation was on a stir plate or homogenized in the room, or whatever the preparation requires. There should be some sort of mixing while you're doing the dosing, because it is a suspension. All right, so great job, everyone. You got a lot of feedback on that one. Good job. Question number 4. So again, very long one. So as per protocol study plan, the tissues to be weighed and retained at necropsy is listed. A list of the applicable tissues that need to be analyzed histopathologically are listed. The pathologist works from home. As QA, what types of records would you expect to see from necropsy, from histology, anything else? Okay, storage container for the samples being collected to see if they're the ones per protocol study plan. Yep, perfect. So you want to see documentation of tissues collected by whom and when. Perfect. Yeah. You want to see gross findings, your scale ID, documentation of weights of each tissue with units of measure. In necropsy, the calibrated balance. Yeah. Is there anything else that we're thinking for necropsy? Any solutions to do fixation of tissues? Absolutely. Proper setup of the necropsy histology computer system. Absolutely. If you have an online system, you want to make sure you're doing that. What else? What about method of euthanasia? I want to see those kind of records, right? So that's typically driven by the protocol. All right, so what else do we want to see? So necropsy, I think we pretty much covered. Any verification a pathologist was able to observe via camera, etc. during necropsy. Yep. If the pathologist was present, we want to see that documented. Absolutely. Now, what about the preparation to slides? So the ones that are analyzed histopathologically, they need to obviously be processed to slides before being read by the pathologist. So what we want to see there. Yeah, proper labeling. Yeah, might not be in the actual study records, but absolutely. If you're in the actual histo lab, you want to see the proper labeling. Who prepared the slides, who read and when. Yep, great. All samples were collected and put to slides as per protocol. Yep, absolutely. Anything else? Or anything more specific? Perhaps we want to see if there's any specific staining that's required or any specific processing. So sometimes like bones are typically decalcified. So you want to make sure that there's documentation that they were decalcified. Stuff like that. Any special staining, obviously you want to see that documented. All right, so now equipment verified stainer pro sector. Yep, absolutely. The any pieces of equipment. Now it depends on how your company may work. Sometimes that is more of a facility type record, simply because they're, depends on how your process is set up. All right, so now the pathologist, so now we're gonna enter in the analyzing. So the pathologist reading of the slides. So the pathologist works from home. So what type of data are we going to expect to see in our study records for the histopathological evaluation? And yes, reagents not expired. That's a good one as well. Labeled clear photos. Yep, if they need to take photos. Electronic data, sure. All right, so we're going to want to see what else are we going to want to see? So what do we mean by electronic data? What specifically are we looking to see for the histology reading? Yeah, so we want to see the evaluation, but what do we want to, what do we specifically want to see? So we want to see which animals were analyzed, which tissues, because it says that there's a specific list that are being analyzed. So it may not be the entire list. It may not be the entire every tissue and organ retained may not be evaluated histopathologically. So you want to see what animals and what tissues were assessed. Any findings, absolutely. Any abnormalities, pathologist sign in on E-system and Part 11 compliant sign off. Yes, if you're doing if you're using electronic system, absolutely there should be an electronic sign off or Part 11 compliance. Is there anything in particular you want to see? There was an interesting fact about the pathologist. Walking animals at finish, sure. What about the statement that the pathologist works from home? Yeah, does he have the rights to be able to access from home? So, yeah, so perhaps working on a VPN if it's electronics, an SOP on remote reading, absolutely. What type of records? Training record equipment used at home. Yeah, those are important. It may not specifically be in your study records, but absolutely you want to make sure that the pathologist is trained and the equipment used at home is appropriately calibrated and all the necessary requirements. What about shipping documents to and from, right? We want chain of custody. How else do we know if we sent them, the pathologist, 100 slides and only 40 came back? Yeah, and if they have a piece of equipment that it's calibrated, and if it's a company piece of equipment that it's calibrated and maintained within your facility records. Yeah, so you typically want to see some sort of shipping documents. How could they possibly read slides at home? Without loss, it happens actually. A lot of pathologists have a home office. I'm not a pathologist, but I am working from a home office, and there are actually a lot of pathologists that do. I think more have probably evolved since 2020, since COVID. A lot more people work remotely. It's very it can be done. There's obviously considerations that you want to make sure that there's appropriate security for the slides, that they're locked up, that they're not just sitting in his, like, you know, on his living room floor where his kid runs around and plays. So slides could be affected by shipping temperatures. Possibly. I think typically by the time it's on slide, it's not really so much a temperature issue. It's potentially more of a breakage issue. But absolutely, those type of things need to be assessed. So usually if pathologists are working from home, there is a process, there are expectations that they need to have, you know, access to the software, that they're limited access, that they have dedicated space, trained to read on scan slides. Yeah, there are scanning of slides as well, if the system is validated, etc. But yeah, if you're actually shipping slides, you want to make sure obviously that the setup has been pre-approved, that your company has a process for that. But you want to see shipping documents, right? Chain of custody is super important, and regulators will look at that for sure. They want to, you know, they want to know if you sent out 100 slides that 100 came back. And absolutely, so those are the type of things. And of course, the data generated from the histo evaluation and their reports. Great. So good input on all this. Yeah. You want to, yeah, sorry, I'm seeing that now. Confirming a return of the slides to facility before finalization. Absolutely, right? Because the pathologist is generally not going to archive their material at their home. Potentially, if they're an individual test site or something, maybe. And just for, it is an interesting fact to know that FDA will go and audit pathologists' home if they are functioning from home. Is environmental monitoring required at the home office? That's a great question. I think it would depend on what your facility's requirement is. I would say typically where my company, we don't have a requirement for the reading because the home office is typically standard temperature. Again, the slides, they're maintained at room temperature, and for the slides, the bigger concern is breakage of a slide versus the actual temperature. And typically the temperature is no different than if they're in their office at the facility versus their office at home. So environmental monitoring may not be required. It depends on how your facility addresses that or whether they feel it's important. Typically security of the slides and of the data, and you know, a proper process for shipping them there and shipping them back is usually the bigger concern. But regulators will go and audit home offices. We've had in years ago, a number of pathologists had to host the FDA for a few hours at their home to show them where, you know, they had a dedicated locked cabinet for the slides. They had their computer with, you know, that's password protected and VPN access to get the software from the facility. There were chain of custody records to and from. So the agency was pleased with the setup, but it doesn't mean just because you're working from home that the FDA won't come a knocking. So good to know. All right, so let's go with the final question that I have that I prepared. And then if there's more time, we can go through some of the practice quiz questions. Again, this is another long one. So again, I tried to ask lots of questions so that people could, you know, have more discussion. So plasma samples were collected and sent to a test site for analysis. What would you expect to see in the protocol or study plan? What would you expect to see in the data at the testing facility? What key information would you expect to see in the test site report or from the test site? So again, you can add your answers. You don't have to necessarily put all the answers for each question right away. So, right. So proposed schedule, amount, tube type, shipping address, contact, shipping conditions. So yeah, that I'm assuming is for protocol. Yeah, the test site principal investigator listed in the protocol. Shipment of samples and conditions of shipping, PI designated and test site. It must be listed in the protocol. In the protocol, you want directions for shipping, who to ship to, when to ship, and what to ship. The assay procedure, timing of samples, tests performed, animal per group ID. Shipping data, external report from the PI, procedures, storage conditions, archiving of the data. Yeah, these are all great answers. The name and address of the test site and PI assigned in the protocol. Sure. So I think we've covered kind of the expectations of the protocol study plan. So what about the second question? What would you expect to see in the data? So a method number used and type of method for analysis, sample disposition if the tests have been performed, the raw data. Yeah, what kind of data? What would you expect to see? Storage, chain of custody. So yeah, validated data. All samples analyzed per laboratory method and reported. Yeah, you want to see that for sure. Who collected samples, how they were processed. Validated method, QC review of data and certain percentage of QA reviewed. Date, time, date of collection, confirmation of protocol requirements, storage conditions, processing information. All right. And what key information would you expect to see in a test site report or from the test site? Instrument equipment's records used during study. Yep. So computer system used, validated software in the report, archives. Compliance statement, quality assurance statement, compliance statement, QA statement, results, all runs whether passed or not, deviations. Great. Investigations, PI name and address, any change in PI and dates, absolutely. All right. Event investigation, sure, if there's any fails, method number and version, great. All right, so I'm just going to go through the notes that I have, and then I'll pick up more that's been added. All right, so the protocol or study plan should list the PI and contact information, identify the test site location, and clearly identify what aspect of the study they're doing, including methods to be used. Obviously, the protocol study plan would also need to identify specifically what samples are being collected, which ones are being sent to the test site for analysis, specific information concerning the method to be used at the test site, etc. And archiving in terms of whether the test site will archive or whether everything will be returned to the test facility for archiving, etc. In your testing facility data, you'd expect to see the records on the blood collection and spin sheets, right? Because we don't collect plasma, we collect blood and spin it to plasma. So you want to see spin sheets and storage, of course, because typically if you're plasma, you're usually going to store it frozen and send it out. You would expect to see the chain of custody documentation. Again, chain of custody is super important information, and regulators really look at that when they see things are moving between different departments, either at a facility or across different companies. They want to see, make sure there's, you know, that second plus in Alcoa, right? Traceability. Where did what start at? Where did it go? And when it came back, was it all traceable? Shipment of samples and documentation to show receipt by the test site. And if samples are to be returned, there should be records of that as well. You want to see the information concerning the storage pre and the storage post receipt. You want to make sure that the information concerning conditions of shipment, right? Typically, like if samples need to be stored frozen, there's often a data logger in there that will alarm if the temperature gets too high, etc. In the test site report, so it should be clearly stated the method of analysis and the resulting conclusion of the analysis, information concerning archiving of the test site material, a QA statement for audits conducted at the phase, and a compliance statement as appropriate. And any protocol study plan deviation should be included in the report. Any SOP deviations may or may not be included in the report, but should still be sent to the test facility so the director is aware. Other documents which should be provided by the test site to the test facility. QA audits of the test site work. So what else do we have added? Just go back to this. List of stock solution used, sample receipt information, reference standards used, computer systems used, investigation, archival as per protocol, method used, any C of A's used, personnel involved, validation report sometimes. Absolutely. All right, great job. Did anybody have any questions from these? This is the last of the prepared questions. We have a few minutes so we can get into some of the quiz questions. No questions? All right. GLP exception should be in the report as well. Yes, absolutely. All right. So we'll move on to some of the sample exam questions. So I will let you read through, well, I'll read through the question and then you guys can read through the answers and I'll give you all a few minutes. You can enter A, B, C, or D, and then we'll discuss which is the appropriate response and basically why. All right, so the protocol for a study says to document color, clarity, and whether there is particulate matter for an extract of test articles. On review of the worksheets for test article preparation and documentation for extraction, only color and clarity were documented. What should be done? Select one. So you can go back and write in the data that particulate matter was not documented at the time. However, it was clear because if it wasn't clear, some description of this particulate matter would have been written. Have a technical review of the mission by the study director and management and document that in the raw data. Have a study director assess the mission and write a deviation to the protocol and the data in the final report. Go find the technician that did the extraction and ask if he, she remembers whether there was particular matter. If the technician remembers, have them document what the technician remembers. All right, so I'm seeing C, 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 C. So there's a lot of C's. Are there any other options that people might think? B, have a technical review. B would probably be the second one. You know, when we said at the beginning, when you're preparing for it, there's usually two responses you can whittle out easily. Which, let me ask the question differently. So which two answers are there no way it's the right answer? So which two can you eliminate right away? All right. Getting a lot of A and D. That's awesome. So A and D are easy to eliminate right away, right? The first one, go back and write in the data that wasn't documented, but it would have been that. We can't assume that something was or wouldn't have been done if there's no documentation, right? The rules of documentation, if it wasn't documented, it didn't happen. So if it's not documented, we don't know if it was or wasn't. So the first one is not meeting Alcoa. And the last one, go find the technician and see if they remember. If they remember, document it. Well, that also doesn't mean the accurate, doesn't meet the contemporaneous aspect of Alcoa. So A and D are easy to remove. So then you're left with B and C, right? Have a technical review by study director and management and document that in the raw data. Or have the study director assess the omission and write a deviation. So the protocol stipulated that. So that's a protocol requirement. So if we didn't do it, it's a protocol deviation. So the review is nice, but it's a deviation. The protocol stipulated something and it wasn't done. So the answer would be C. So you all got that right. Good job. 21 CFR Part 58 130E, all data generated during the conduct of non-clinical laboratory study, except those that are generated by automated data collection systems, shall be recorded directly, promptly, and legibly in ink. 5835B5, the QAU shall determine that no deviations from approved protocols or standard operating procedures were made without proper authorization and documentation. So, as we established, it was a protocol requirement, and we didn't do that protocol requirement, so it becomes a deviation. Under OECD principles, which is section 2, 1.2, and 2E, the study director responsibilities ensure that the procedures specified in the study plan are followed and assess and document the impact of any deviations from the study plan on the quality and integrity of the study and take appropriate corrective action if necessary. Acknowledge deviations from standard operating procedures during the conduct of the study. So great job on that. So as you can see, there's generally going to be two that are easy enough to eliminate, and then you're left with, at worst case, usually a 50-50 guess. And I threw in that the requirements coming from the stipulations. In the exam, you're not required to quote off 58 130E. You're not required to know the specific citation of the regulation. You just have to know the regulations and know how to apply them. Okay. All right. Here's another question. We might get through this one, maybe time for one more. All right. A study plan describes the requirement of transfer of blood samples to a freezer maintained at less than -20 Celsius immediately after collection and subsequently to a freezer maintained at -80 ± 5 for long-term storage. At the time of transferring the samples from -20 to -80 freezer, the study director noticed the temperature of the -20 was above -20. What action should the study director take to maintain the integrity of the study results? Select one. Okay, so we have a lot of answers for C as the correct answer. Before we jump into which is the correct answer, which two do you think you can eliminate right away? Okay, so we've got B and D, A and B, B and D. All right, so document in the data. That is an answer. It's not a complete one, but it's not wrong. The second one, amend the study plan and change the initial storage temperature. So we could do that, but it would still not address the situation of it happening initially. So perhaps if the -20 was incorrect and subsequently going in future instances, you could amend, but that doesn't address this situation. So B is kind of really not an appropriate response. Inform the study sponsor, no documentation required. Well, if you do something, you need to document it, right? So that too is an immediate no. So B and D are kind of immediate, not going to happen. Thanks, Lydia. All right, so B and D and A, some people put A as an immediate documenting the data. So documenting the data, you do want to make sure it's documented, right? It is important, but it's really, you know, it's really easy to see that A, B, and D are pretty much not the correct answer. If the above -20 was among the range of plus and -5, can we accept it? We would not be able to, just because, again, the wording in the study plan said maintained at less than -20. So if we said a target of -20 or less, or if we said approximately, the term less than -20 is very explicit. You kind of can't talk your way out of that. You can certainly have a range, but the study plan was not listed as a range. So if it was approximately minus 120 or less or something like that, you'd be able to accept it. Kind of like the -80, right? It has the acceptable range. -20 was very explicit. So unfortunately, your hands are tied based on the wording. So that's why it's always important to, the directors need to make sure that they're being precise with their terminology and open-ended when they need it. So the correct answer is C, like we all know, and that's coming from 58.35B5. The QAU shall determine that no deviations from approved protocols or standard operating procedures were made without proper authorization and documentation. And OECD Principles of GLP, Section 2.1.22E, the director's responsibility. So that was kind of the same quote from the previous question, because again, it was the deviation. If it was -20 alone, can we accept? If it said specifically, it depends on what the wording is in your study plan. If your SOP that allows for a range, but your protocol is very explicit with one temperature, unfortunately, no. So you need to give the range or indicate target of -20. So if you say a target of -20, then you defer to your SOPs. If you say we're going to store this at -20 in your protocol, that doesn't give you a leniency of a range. So you have to watch the wording. But that's a great question. So it really is, it actually highlights something important for the exam itself. Watch what the wording is, right? So here we don't know in this example of how much above the -20. Maybe it was only -19. And if it said target of less than -20, we'd probably be okay. Well, actually, study plan describes requirements of two-way freezer maintained at -20. I would say it needs to say set to maintain -20. Maintain kind of implies one temperature, which is or lower. So it's set to it. This wording would imply you can't actually even be at -20. You have to be less than -20. Yeah, set to maintain would be okay. Set or range, absolutely, per SOP. Yeah, absolutely. And what is allowable is all going to be based on what your SOP allows. It may not be the same allowance per company. But yeah, so that highlights kind of the type of thing that you want to look for. So if the temperature was above, it doesn't say how much above. So that's the first part of the question. Okay, well, we don't know. Maybe it was at 15 degrees, like a positive 15. So that's a huge range. So that's a huge problem, right? But even if it doesn't, it said maintained. So what's your wording. Wording is super important, and you will see that if you're careful about the wording in the question, you should be fine to get to the right answer. However, you will see that some of these questions are quite long-winded, right? And you do have to take your time. So sometimes if you're starting to feel like you're slowing down, tag that one and come back to a long-winded question. Come back to it, that's a fairly long question. This one is a little bit shorter, but the responses are fairly long.
I think one thing to remember is that the protocol does beat the SOPs, right?
Correct.
If a protocol is super explicit about what's required, then it's a protocol deviation, even if your SOP says that you're allowed to do something else.
Yeah, that's why you have to watch your wording. Now, if you're your wording as what the regulators like to say, wishy-washy in your protocol, then it will default to your SOP. So if you indicate, set to maintain or approximate or whatever, that would allow you to defer to your SOP, or if you say within your SOP. All right, so we are at the top of the hour. So there were 3 additional questions, but again, those are all available for you to go check out at the SQA website. Go under the RQAP information, and if you have any questions on that, you can take the quiz there. And I do encourage you to try it just to get a sense of how much time you have to do things and get a sense of how long the type of questions will be, etc. So thank you all for attending today, for all you who participated, and have a great rest of your day.
Hey, Sherry.
Hi.
Just wanted to say thank you very much for dealing with the minutes
Oh,
while
no
I was
problem.
gone, and for clarifying what I should be doing with them.
Oh, no problem. I was just like, because if you make updates, Nusha may not take that version. So it was just more to just like FYI, just let her know if you want something added and she'll make the updates. Yeah,
Yeah,
you just
well,
need to worry about the minutes.
it was actually quite apropos because I had created a whole agenda, went on to the RQAP website to see if I could log into the directors or the board side of things, and I could, and then I saw she'd already prepared an agenda. So so I'd actually wasted effort by not checking that first, but
Yeah.
anyway. But
No, it's fine. And again, this is all just a learning curve for everybody right new in the position. And that's the fun and excitement. So you'll
yeah,
see after a couple sessions, you'll be like, okay, this is easy peasy.
yeah. Well, I figured it was. It was the questions and comments that came back that made me suddenly go, maybe I should be reading up on Robert's rules and what the formal requirements are, blah blah blah. So I kind of went too far without going back and seeing what was actually required. So it's okay. Anyway, good. Okay. Well,
All
thank you
right.
very much,
Well,
Sherry.
no problem. Take
Have a
care.
good week. Bye-bye.
Uh, Kavitaben. Sorry, I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name right. I don't have an answer for you. I'm fairly certain they will reach out if there is any deficiencies. They typically do that, but I will pass your question on to Lydia, and she'll get back, or one of us will get back to you about that, okay? Just to make sure. But I'm fairly certain that they do typically reach out to members. They won't just deny. Too bad you can't take it. No, they'll get back to you like, oh, we don't see this. Do you have other documentation? We generally try not to refuse people. All right. Have a good rest of your day.